struggling to move your nonprofit forward? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Nonprofit Architect, where we are giving you the actionable steps you need to launch and grow your nonprofit organization. Now, here's your host, Travis Johnson.
Hey, thanks for tuning into the show. But before we get started, I wanted to give you all the opportunity to hop in our group at facebook.com/group/nonprofit architect. We're running a contest right now for your chance to win a $200 donation. We're not just building stronger nonprofits by giving you the actionable steps to do what you do better, but we're also putting our money where our mouth is. And if you sign up for the contest, and the rules are in the group, that you will get the chance to win a $200 donation and have a direct, real-world, real-time impact to your mission. If you're struggling with fundraising, if you're unsure of how to handle a board, if you're not sure where to go and what your next steps are because you have this endless list of things to do, you can also sign up for the Nonprofit Architect Alliance Mastermind Group. Real easy, real low barrier of entry at $50 a month to get in with other leaders like yourself that find themselves stuck. Help let other people in the group solve your problems. If you're doing this thing as a solo shop or without a lot of support from your board, it's hard to know who to go talk to. It's hard to know what to do next. And if you're doing this alone, chances are you're not going to get very far. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go as a group. So also in the group, sign up for the Nonprofit Architect Alliance Mastermind Group and let the experts help build your stronger nonprofit each and every month. Now let's go to the interview. Hey, welcome to the show. Today I have a guest that you will love, love, love by the end of this. However long this thing is going to be, I took like pages of notes, like smoke was rolling off the pen. I don't know how long this is going to go. I have today with me Debbie Korge, and I'm so excited to talk about all the things, which are many. I'm talking policies and procedures, stuff that you would never think is so vital if you're not too far into your nonprofit journey yet. But we're going to cover receiving stock as a gift, media relations policy, document retention or destruction policy, job descriptions, disaster preparedness policy, whistleblower policy, and probably a whole bunch of other stuff that we haven't gotten into yet. But Debbie, how the heck are you?
I'm doing well. Living in South Florida, having a cold front come through, might get down to 79 degrees tomorrow. Kind of a rainy day today, but life is good.
Oh, life is fantastic. You were on a boatload of boards. You were in the Junior League of Miami. You were on Casa Valentina, the Education Fund, Informed Families, and about 20 others, it looks like, that I neglected to write down. But you are currently heading up South Florida Philanthropic Consulting Services. Why the passion for nonprofits, and what is it that you do with your consulting?
I believe that nonprofits are the backbone of so much that is done in any community, whether it's feeding the homeless, providing shelter for the homeless, working with victims of domestic violence, working with victims of trafficking, ensuring youth in foster care are getting all that they need. There's not enough manpower to go around, and these nonprofits really step in and make a difference and improve the quality of life for so many people in our communities. And, not to neglect them, but the animals and everybody and everything, the planet, the earth, the water.
Oh, absolutely. I know that, focused donations to a nonprofit that are taking care of the things that you care about are going to do a much better job than if we just give a pile of money to the government for them to figure out. So why not focus your dollars and have an exponential result by donating and supporting the nonprofit in the area that you care about? That's awesome. So you took like all this board experience and you said, I've learned so much stuff about nonprofit work that I want to help people directly. And you started your consulting business. Is that right?
That's pretty much it. Not only was I on boards, but I also worked for and ran nonprofits. So I have experienced these organizations as a volunteer, as a board member, as a staff person, and as an executive leader. So I was able to take all of that information. And when I finally stepped away from my last position, I started getting phone calls. I said, you know what? Now's the time to become a consultant and help those that are still helping others in the community.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that's a lot of the same reason that I got into it with my experience. I wanted it to be my mission. I saw it as my mission to help the helpers. There's only so much good work I can do within an organization, but if I'm able to touch and help many organizations, I think that's a much better use of my personal time. And I think that you agree. But your expertise, you talked my ear off. I don't know how long our conversation went before, but I have never run out of note-taking space on the paper that I used. And I had like sticky notes coming out, and I had a second page started. And you talked my ear off about policies and procedures, which are so...
Apologies, but...
Oh, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. There's nothing more. See, a little bit behind the scenes, and for you listeners out there, if I've mentioned this before, I'm sorry. I'm really selfish when I do my pre-interview stuff because I get to ask all the questions that I want answered and things that I haven't figured out yet. I get to ask the experts before they ever come on. So it's like I'm taking a class every time I do a pre-interview. It's wonderful. I love it. But I have never heard such passion regarding policies and procedures in my life.
One of the first positions I held, I don't know, paid positions, I guess you could say, was with a nonprofit where I had been in development, and then they were moving me over to operations. So the first thing I did was I went to a training on policies and procedures. And the facilitator for this training came up with this opening statement where he basically said, if you don't have a policy, you have a problem. And that's just one of those phrases that has stuck with me over the years. And so whenever I go into an organization, whether I was a staff person, executive leader, board member, what have you, when something came along, I would always ask, well, what is your policy on this? And sometimes I would get, as I call it, the deer stuck in the headlights look. And other times I would have this, well, here, read this. And sometimes even after I read, I go, well, this is great, but what about this? And again, so working with them and making sure that they didn't have a problem at the end of the day. Because when that happens, you have an organization that runs so much more efficiently, so much more smoothly. They're able to anticipate situations and know they have a way to deal with them when they happen.
Oh, absolutely. And a well-written policy and procedure takes a lot of the pressure off of the board or the executive director to come up with solutions on the fly when you have it spelled out. Hey, in this situation, we've already done the planning. We've already done the analysis on it. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah,
and it
exactly.
doesn't have a lot of extra rework, or it might have one question, but that's much different than bringing a problem up and having no idea how you're going to attack this thing.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen a few times too. And like I said, then everybody that's involved has to stop what they're doing and deal with that situation to get it in place, the policy in place to be able to move forward. And other things are being, I won't say ignored, but not given as much attention as they deserve at that moment. And then they get behind on that, and then you play the catch-up game.
Yeah, absolutely. I can just picture an organization, something comes up. Hey, everyone else, stop what you're doing. We have to focus on this and make sure that this doesn't land us in jail, wreck our organization, grow into a bigger problem. And so every other area of the organization slows down or stops to handle this big problem. And a lot of people that are in bigger organizations, they pour over, hours upon hours of reading through policies and procedures to get a qualification or do a thing. But those are there for a reason. And those are there to help you out and guide you in this decision making. And the best part about them is they're not set in stone. They can be updated and revised if you have a policy in place that doesn't cover the situation, which is much easier to tweak something than to start from scratch, I think.
Oh, I remember policies and procedures from, 20 some years ago where the discussion was, well, do we want to put things about receiving documents by fax? And now he's like, oh, okay, now let's just say electronically. And it kind of covers the whole gamut.
Absolutely. But I know from our pre-discussion that we talked about 3 main policy areas. What are those policy areas we should be concerned with as nonprofits, and a little background on each of those sections?
Well, there's actually, I guess you could say, 3 functional areas of a nonprofit. The administration, as I put it, lights on, doors open, that sort of thing. And then you've got the fundraising, which brings in the money to keep the lights on and the doors open. And then you've got the program side, which is, what all of this other stuff is supporting. And so you need to look at how you're running your day-to-day operations. You need to look at how you're fundraising, and you need to look at how your programs are operating, because the programs, especially, a lot of times are being funded by grants or foundations or whatever. And those funders want to see that you have the proper protocols in place to handle, again, whatever may come up based on the work and your mission.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing like reaching one of those amazing donors that want to give you a whole load of money. And then they say, well, how would you use this? Or do you have a policy on accepting a gift this large? And then you're caught in the headlights, and this great opportunity that could help revolutionize, help get programs on track, could help you get to that next level or open a building, is now lost because you don't know how you're going to receive that and what you're going to do with that money once you get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I just had a client not too long ago that for quite a while I kept saying, you need to have, because they were undergoing a major fundraising campaign, I said, you need to have a policy in place as to how to accept stocks. And the response was, yeah. Well, lo and behold, a couple of months ago, everybody opened up their email, and there was an email from a donor saying, hey, I've got stock I want to donate to you. What do I do? And again, that pause, everybody in the executive decision-making level had to stop what they were doing and figure out how they were going to handle this stock transaction. It was everything from, okay, we need to open up the investment account. We don't have one. Where are we going to go? How are we going to pick one out? And, oh, yeah, we need to have this done within the next 24 hours. And then once that was done, what's the policy going to be with regard to the acceptance of stock transactions? This group was a smaller group, and they don't have long-term investments yet. But that's coming around the corner soon, and that will be another issue with them. So they said these are stocks going specifically to our building fund. So they accepted the stock transaction, they sold the stock, and then they transferred the funds over into their building fund account. But again, there was no investment committee to make these decisions. There was no investment policies to talk about how these things are going to be handled. None of that was in place. And so they had to deal with, okay, this is the here and now. And now I keep saying to them, you're going to need to plan for the future.
So if we were looking at this as an organization that doesn't have all the things you just mentioned, and you're like, you know what, we do have some big friends that would be possibly interested in this. This is a policy that we should create. What are the things that we have to make sure are in that policy? And what do we have to have set up so we can make sure we're doing it right? Well,
like I said, an investment account. So you would need to look at those financial institutions that do provide investments accounts. I'm not going to mention any names, but some of the larger banks and some of the larger investment companies. Some of them,
we'll mention some, and we'll say that we're not supporting these guys in any way. We're not getting paid. These are just some out there for you to think about. I know there's like Vanguard, there's TD Ameritrade, there's those investment type organizations, and then banks themselves, you'd say, have some of this options available, right?
Like the Wells Fargos of the world, not so much the smaller community banks, but the larger ones, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, like I just mentioned, and some of those. Now, some of them do have a minimum requirement. I was talking with somebody at BNY Mellon, I believe it was, somebody I know personally, and because a couple of questions came up while this organization was trying to figure stuff out, and he said, well, we don't even consider anything under, I forget, it was like $5 million. It was some astronomical number. And if I'm wrong, I apologize. But I said, they're not even anywhere close to that yet. Mm-hmm. So again, in doing your research, you have to find out, is there a minimum amount that they will accept, and go from there. And what do you anticipate your minimum amount to open the account with? And, those are just a few considerations. And again, by the time the donor is ready to give you stock, you've probably had long conversations and really engaged this donor so they know what your needs are. And so if you're really looking for those funds to help run the day-to-day operations, then that's what that money is going to be used for. They may say, hey, listen, I know you're doing, if you're past that and you're, trying to save for a rainy day, so to speak, they say, hey, listen, I know you're doing work in domestic violence, so I'm going to give you this donation for you to use for your domestic violence programs or your animal welfare program or whatever it may be. And so you've got some sort of parameters that they've given within the focus of your mission. And again, that has to be front and center. This is our mission, and we will only accept funds that will help us support our mission. And so that has to be right there. And then, you also have to look at, okay, are we doing a building fund? Is this for the building fund? Sometimes donors will say, hey, I'm giving you the money, but you can't touch it until you get other donations for the same purpose that are equal to or greater than whatever. And then you can use the income coming off of that. So that's another thing you have to consider. And then you also have to consider your own organization's investment policies. A lot of organizations, what they do when they get to that point where they're getting the stock transactions, but the stocks may not be your stocks, because you want to make sure you have an investment policy that really will help you long term. Mm-hmm. So you might bring together an investment committee, and this is where you, again, tap into those wonderful volunteers in your community where you do get these investment people, who, have the $5 million limit that can't take your money, but they can be in your investment committee. And they can help you decide what those investment policies are going to be. How much goes into cash? What percentage can you keep in cash? What percentage do you keep in stocks? What percentage do you keep in mutual funds, et cetera, et cetera? And you review those policies quite often, and you have, at least quarterly meetings with your financial planners, and they'll talk to you about, what their recommendations are. Hey, we're seeing things are a little wonky in the stock market, so we're recommending that we sell off some of these stocks and put more into mutual funds, or, you need to build up your cash reserves a little bit because things are, looking 2008-ish, and that sort of stuff. So there's a lot going on there, but the ultimate goal is your policies for your investments and your stocks need to be helping you not only today, but for the future.
Oh, and absolutely. And for those of you that don't know or might be unaware, there's organizations out there that everything that comes in goes into a fund or an endowment. And one of their policies might be that we don't spend the principal ever. We only spend maybe the dividends or the interest accrued. And organizations like I was on the board of the Shine Foundation, that was something that they were working on building when it got to a certain amount that they were going to be switching their policy to that. I know organizations like the Freemasons in the U.S., that's their policy is they have never touched the principal amount of money that's been donated, but they do take off the investments, or the interest that's been paid to do certain things like keep the lights on or to do a program. I mean, can you imagine having that big of a chunk of money set aside in an investment to where you're able to deliver all your programs just based off the interest? Man, what a great place to be, and what a fantastic vision to have. If that's not something that you considered as a nonprofit and you're listening to this, maybe think about that. I know some people, especially the new guys, still think, which is not true, that they have to spend every dollar they get right when they get it because you can't have any kind of accrual building. That's just not true. You can definitely not true. Yeah, you can definitely build and save for the future, and that's a great way to do it.
I've even seen some nonprofits that within their organization, they set up a separate foundation like you were saying, specifically for that. So you've got the nonprofit that's doing the programs and services, but then they have their own foundation and building it up. And then, like you mentioned, when it gets to a certain point, all the income derived from that is then put back into the work that's being done for the organization. Now, does it cover everything? Maybe not always, but at least you always know you have that little cushion there to help with the day-to-day stuff and getting you going to the next level.
Yeah, that is awesome. If you haven't put in a fiscal policy like this or something involving investing or receiving stock as a gift, that is something that you should definitely look into if you're cultivating those higher end donors. Absolutely. If you haven't already, you should get this started. But what about those like new guys? Do you just need like a policy to do everything? Like if I want to talk to like a reporter and they want to highlight our nonprofit, should we have a policy on media relations? Even for smaller ones, you can have that, because the last thing you want to have is 5 different people talking to media outlets and each one sharing a slightly different message or story. It's not unusual to say, if you get that call or that email or what have you, that you have the three people, your plan A, your plan B, and your plan C person, that are the contacts for all media. And they're the ones that have the general talking points. They are the ones that will be the one who will be able to say, this is the issue and this is how we're working on it, or this is our huge signature event and this is why it's so important. But I won't necessarily say that each message is scripted, but the details are there so that they are not just shooting from the hip, talking off the cuff, and saying something that should not be said. Oh, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of having a very concise, clear and concise message that first off is 1 or 2 sentences and everyone in the organization has it memorized verbatim. But like when I was on the Shine Foundation, we had our designated media contact was the president of the board. And when they did their turnover, or leading up to their turnover, they were ensuring that everything that the successor was going to be able to do was keep that same message, that same vision, and understand what their role was as the media contact. There's nothing worse than getting all excited, having the founder on TV, and they say, how can we help you in the community? And they don't have an ask. They're not sure what they're going to be asking for before they get there. They don't know that they definitely should ask for volunteers, that they should definitely ask for donations, large or small, recurring or one time. Whatever the thing is that you decide as an organization, they need to know before they get in front of the camera. And if you're unclear of how to get connected to the media, we have this fantastic interview with Lori McNeil in the archive there. Go ahead and look through and check out hers. She has a great book, Media Secrets Revealed, and she teaches you how to get in contact and get promoted on the media. So nonprofit, not a nonprofit, whoever's listening, that is there for you as a resource. But definitely as a nonprofit, ensure you have the policies in place to make sure that media appearance is successful.
And not only that, you also, whoever the person or persons are, they need to know what your principles are and what your position is on the issues around your mission. So again, when something comes up and the question is asked, well, why does your organization support this? Or why is your organization against this? You're able to say, well, our principles are, our position is, and you're able to answer those questions because those documents are back there rattling around in your brain because you've been prepared to be able to answer those questions. So it's not just being able to talk about the work that you do, but to talk about why the work you're doing is so important. Why are you making that difference? Or why this fundraiser, whatever it may be in today's world, is so that people want to be able to give to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you are in front of the media and there is something, say a piece of legislation floating around, like I'm in Oklahoma City area, I know firsthand that there's nonprofits in the area that help to keep the homeless fed or keep them in good shelter. Right. If you are getting in front of the media and there is a bill going up the hill that's going to directly affect the homeless population in your area, and that's something that you are serving towards, you might want to be familiar with what that legislation is. And if you do or do not have an official position on that, but I would sure hate to be in front of the camera and not know that the legislation exists.
Yeah. And be blindsided. Well, what's your position on this bill? And not have any idea. But also to know the data that supports why you're doing what you're doing. I currently have a client that's building a residential community for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities who can live independently. They can tell you that currently in the state of Florida, there's about 14,000 people that need this type of housing. And they're going to be maybe the 6th or 7th in the state to have this. So obviously, but they're able to share, this is why this is important. This is what the need is. And even if it's not legislation, to be able to share the numbers to show why it's so important.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier policy about getting a fax and what to do with that fax, and then tweaking the policy to talk about anything received electronically. But like me, as being in the Navy, we have, classified material, and we have to know how to handle that classified material, how to store it and how to destroy it if we need to. There's a whole policy and program in place from the NSA that tells us what to do with that stuff. What are organizations that have all sorts of documents and different things? What do they need to know? And what kind of policy should be in place for them in order for them to handle their documents correctly?
Well, first of all, I have to say, back in the day, I worked at the Department of State. So I understand about classified documents and making sure that they were secured because those Marines came by every office every night and checked everything. And you just hope there was not a red card on your desk the next morning. Yeah. Yeah. And then you had to kind of go down to their office and go, hi, I'm here to collect. But it's interesting. Again, I went to a training on record retention and document destruction. And the facilitator at that time said that the state of Florida had the most comprehensive record retention policy in the country. And so when I went back, and the organization I was with really didn't have one at the time, the first thing I did was I went online and I looked at the state of Florida record retention policy, because I figured if I followed their policy, since I was in Florida, I shouldn't have a problem. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff on there that didn't relate to the work that we were doing, but I looked at where I could compare apples to apples. And so I built my first record retention policy, and the destruction policy was based off of that. And then what I also did, again, making sure that I was being compliant, I turned to the CPA people I know, and I said, what do you recommend with regard to record retention and destruction of financial documents as it relates to your audit, your 990s, and so on. And so they gave me information. And then I also looked at what the different funders required. We had one funder at two different organizations, same funder, that we had to keep records relating to all the work that we did for 5 years from 6 months after the ending date of our contract. And it was a multi-year contract. So based on that, we were having to keep records for up to, in some cases, up to 8 years before we could get rid of them. And so now you're thinking, well, what about storage space? What have you? So again, you can also scan and store documents online, which helps immensely with a lot of the work that you're doing. If you have some that have sensitive natures, stick them in a folder that is password protected. or encrypted or and you have to have the password to be able to access those documents. Just make sure that there is, a proper chain of command should you leave, that somebody else knows the password. That the right people know the password to be able to gather that information. Also, depending on the type of records you keep, you might have to comply with HIPAA. What are your requirements for HIPAA? And so you kind of have to look at what kinds of records you're keeping and think, okay, this has medical information, so should I be looking at the HIPAA requirements? This has financial information. Should I be talking to the CPA? This has personnel information. Should I be talking to a lawyer? And just kind of look at a lot of that as to how to store things securely, and also how to and how long to keep the documents. Oh,
absolutely. So just a small recap. You verify with the state policy. You talk to a CPA to talk to you about financial records, and you talk to funders, which could be grant authorities, foundations, or federal, and what their requirements are. And it's fun. Well, I don't know if any of this stuff is fun, but there's people out there that are just like engrossed in this conversation that are absolutely loving it, and I thank you for those people. Those are that's not my zone of genius or my fun zone, but understanding where the authorities are driven from and how to employ those, and then ensuring that not only do you have a policy, but that your staff / volunteer / board members are trained on these things, because you're going to have a turnover cycle on everybody in there. Your board members might be a 2-year commitment or a 3-year commitment, but eventually all those board members will be gone, and you will have new board members, and you will have to train them on those things. Roughly 18 months for an executive director or a fundraiser, you're going to have to make sure that they understand how to handle those documents, and again, turn over the passwords so other people, the next person down the line, understands how to use that stuff. Being in the military, we deal with personal information. We deal with HIPAA and medical information. We deal with, depending on what part of the military, and you're dealing with things in the nuclear missile world, and you have to understand those procedures. You get around classified information, you just understand all those things, and you got to not mess it up every time you touch it.
And you need to know which documents you have to shred or burn, because we had burn bags when I was at the State Department. We had to, had to go in, and when it was filled, we had to seal it up. We had to take it to a location, and then it was burned. So you have to decide which documents get shredded, which documents you can just, throw in your trash can, and, at what point do you, okay, I've got 15 drafts of this final document. Okay, maybe I can get rid of all the drafts and just keep the final document. But maybe because this is something we work so hard on, and there's a possibility this could happen again, I want to save 1 or 2 drafts just to be able to plan for the future in case this ever happens again. And then all the background information that went into maybe preparing that grant application, where you were having to do the research on the community needs assessment and all the data and everything like that. Well, that data may be important for another grant, but you're not going to file for that other grant for another year. But you don't want to have to do 5 years of research again a year from now. So figure what you need to save there, and what can go into your working file, into the cloud, and what has to be printed and saved. And a lot of times they'll tell you that original in one copy. And so you can consider your scanned document, maybe the original or the copy, and then you have the filed copy. So you're covered that way. You've got both your original and your filed copy, because you got a hard copy of one and you got another one stored up in the cloud.
And see, currently the Navy is on a shred every paper policy. If you're done with the paper, 0 of it goes in the trash. Everything goes through the shredder. And you mentioned burn bag. I know in the military, you have to have certain classification of shredder. And people listening to this right now, they're like, man, this is getting deep and this is crazy. There is
cross shredder as opposed to the straight shredder.
There is some nasty stuff out there. There's some nasty people out there. There just is, or well-intentioned but misinformed, or whatever the thing is. And there's someone out there that might be going through your trash. It could be for legal purposes, because they're filing a lawsuit against you. It could be corporate espionage, the thing that you're working on, someone else is trying to steal. It could be a competitor that's looking for internal documents that maybe shed some light on you negatively, and they want to get a hold of that stuff. So whatever the thing is, make sure you have the right policy to help protect you as an organization, to help you prepare for the future, and make sure you're not violating federal or state policy on whatever it is. And get a crosscut shredder so they can't put documents back together, please.
Yeah. Kind of reminds you of if anybody out there has ever seen it, the movie Argo, where they were shredding the documents in Iran before the embassies were taken over. And then, later on, you've got these kids that have been hired that are taking all these little strips of paper and putting them together like a puzzle to kind of figure out what was destroyed and what is important. So yes, you may not have to go to that extreme, but again, when you're dealing with HIPAA requirements, your financial documents, bank account records, or whatever, if you no longer need to keep them, you want to make sure that nobody else gets that information. But, the last thing you want to do is, come in one morning and find out your bank account's been wiped out.
That would be awful.
Because somebody, they got
shred your important documents if you no longer need them, or if you do have them, make sure they are in a safe, in a locked cabinet, in a whatever.
And that's why I also recommend that when you're dealing with these documents and they're stored in the cloud, that you have they're either password encrypted and password protected with a the password list locked up someplace, not stored in the cloud, but locked up someplace, and maybe two different places, so that you can access this. God forbid, you leave and somebody else needs to get into them. And especially as you get more and more, you might have 2 or 3 different bank accounts. You might have client files. You might have a donor management system. You might have, all of this stuff, different passwords for everything. Just like they tell us personally, don't use the same password over and over. Same thing with all of these different accounts. Don't use the same password, and don't use any of the common passwords.
You mean like password or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
Yeah.
The password is password.
Yes.
I got to get off this heavy topic here, this document policy, which is very vital, very scary, and also very heavy. Let's get on something later, like job descriptions. Like I come into an organization, they say, hey, you're the new program director. Well, should I have a policy that tells me what a program director is and what they're responsible for?
Well, first of all, you have your overall employee handbook, manual, whatever, that has all the different policies and procedures about the day-to-day operations. But there should also be a policy that for every position there is a job description. And actually the person that is being hired should know before they come on board what that job description is. Chances are that job description was posted on a board somewhere. It was shared with them in some way, because they're saying, okay, I meet all the criteria to be able to apply for this job. So again, this is something that for every position, it should, even a part-time position, you should have something that says this is what is expected of the person working in this position. And you should have what the basics, do you require a college degree? How many years of experience? Do they need to have experience using different Microsoft and Google and all that other stuff? Do they need to have, for fundraiser, do they need to have donor management system experience? And if, again, fundraising, are they more of the grant writer position, or is this going to be a donor relations position? Is this going to be a major gifts officer? Is this going to be someone who kind of manages everything for everybody? All of that needs to be spelled out so there is no ambiguity on day one. You don't want to have a person by day 3 going, I'm not doing anything that you told me I was supposed to be doing, and I'm out of here. And then you have to start the whole process over again.
Or you get a new board member that comes on and they don't know what you need from them. I've talked to so many frustrated founders or executive directors, like, I just don't understand why they're not helping me. I was like, well, have you told them what you would like them to do?
I work on not only board roles and responsibilities, but officer roles and responsibilities. If you're the board chair, what is expected of you? If you're the treasurer, what is expected of you? If you're the general board member, what is expected of you? Is there a give-get policy? What is that? And again, nobody should be brought onto a board unless they know exactly what is expected of them. Nobody should be moved into a leader position on a board until they know what is expected of them. Because you don't want, especially for these smaller nonprofits where you may not have a large staff at first, and so the board are having to be, as I call them, some of the worker bees. You don't want to bring on somebody to be the treasurer and they go, oh, yeah, sure, I can be treasurer, no problem. And then you tell them, oh, and by the way, now that you're treasurer, once a month, you're going to have to reconcile all the books and prepare all the financial statements. What? You never told me that.
There's nothing like being brought in to do something and you either were misinformed, not fully informed, or they really don't know what they want from you.
Yeah.
So many times in the military, I've told the troops, like, what's my job? And I'm like, whatever your boss needs you to do, that's within the law. That's your job. That's true, right? That's not false, but you should have some kind of base level knowledge or base level idea of what the job entails. If you are going to go work as a dishwasher in a local diner, you understand that you're going to be cleaning dishes, probably going to be bussing dishes, probably going to be sweeping and mopping floors. But unless they tell you what they want, you can't deliver on what they want. You can't give them what they said they want unless you know what they want.
And you also have to make sure that you're very clear on what the expectations are, especially if you're dealing with, and I don't want to go too much in the weeds here, situations where somebody may apply for the position where they may not be able to physically do some of the things. They meet all the criteria, but then they have some sort of disability that precludes them from, being able to sit for a long time, being able to walk distances and everything like that. And so you need to make sure that the expectations are very, very clear and that you are able to make accommodations as necessary to ensure that that person is able to fulfill their job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what kinds of positions need to have a description?
Well, first of all, every officer of the board, the chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, and whatever other committee chairs, all of those positions, in my opinion, need to have some sort of job description. Nominating governance, finance, a lot of times the treasurer is the chair of the finance committee, so it says that right there in their job description. With regard to the organization, every person there, the executive director of programs, your fundraising staff, everybody there needs to have a job description. In some cases, you may even have job descriptions for different volunteers. Maybe you have someone who is volunteering to come in and help with filing twice a week. And so you want to make it very clear what filing entails. And, and maybe there's some weeks where you don't have a lot of filing, so that they need to know that they need to contact you prior to coming in, so not to waste their time and your time, if there's no work for them to do. You need to make sure that they also understand about the need to, be confidential on documents that they may be handling. Again, going back kind of to the confidentiality policy. And just making sure that those type, if they're chairing your gala, what's expected of, back pre-COVID, what was the expectation of the chair of the gala? Were they supposed to be bringing in, tables? Were they supposed to be, just managing all the committees? What was the expectation of, let's say, your gala chair or chairs, to be able, so that, again, when they accepted the job, they knew what was expected of them from the beginning.
So, you covered the gamut of positions here. Should some of these be, or all of them, should they be in the bylaws, or should they be like under the operational charter? Like where do you put these documents? I've seen some bylaws that have position descriptions for the board in the bylaws. but not for other people?
Yeah, I would say, the bylaws, most of the bylaws that I dealt with and I try to deal with, I basically should have the minimum number, the maximum number, how often the board meets, what different positions you need to have on the board. There will always be a chair, there will always be a secretary, there will always be a treasurer, blah, blah, that sort of stuff. And how often the board will meet, and things like that. But everything else, as far as the operational side, I think could be separate.
Okay, so if I'm a nonprofit and I have these things in my bylaw, like the responsibilities of the board chairman, I could remove those from the bylaws and put them in a different policy.
Yeah. You could say in your bylaws there will be the following officers, and you might the chair of the board who will ensure the integrity blah blah of the board of directors, and you might just want to put 2 or 3 keywords there, but then you have what the day-to-day stuff is, because the day-to-day stuff, as we talked about earlier, can be tweaked and changed, and maybe tweaked and changed over the years, and you don't want to have to keep going back and saying, okay, now we need to amend the bylaws yet again. You want that to be the basis. The bylaws should be the basis for what's being done over here.
I gotcha. Yeah, so you heard it here from our expert Debbie that they don't have to be in the bylaws for the board description. I brought it up in that way because I've talked to so many that have it in there, and there's nothing wrong with that, but then they come up with a change, and the change process is really just a huge hassle when it doesn't have to be if they're in your bylaws. So take them out, make a separate policy that's perfectly okay, and then make sure all of these things, make sure your legal team is reviewing these for compliance, punctuation, all of those things. That
they meet the state requirements, if there are state requirements, that sort of stuff. But the bylaws, like I say, is the overall governing document. And then everything else should come out of that into something separate.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution should be, our overall governing document. And then we've got a problem here in OKC, we don't amend the Constitution to fix it. There's some people that try to amend the state constitution, but we vote on that stuff. But you don't have to. You can create a separate policy.
Right. Perfect. Yeah.
Wanted to make sure that we said that.
Good. It just makes it easier because, again, your nominating governance committee should be reviewing these documents, in my opinion, at least once a year. 1, to make sure that there is not a need for change. And 2, to make sure if there is a need for change, what it should be and why. It gets back to mission drift, and so on and so forth. If you say minimum of 5 board members, a maximum of 21, because I always say have an odd number of people on your board, but you're really struggling to get to that, maximum number, and you never reach that maximum number. Well, okay, fine. Keep it, don't keep, lower it, whatever you want to do. But, if you have something where it says you must have 13 board members and you're really struggling, then say, well, why do we have to have 13? What was so magical about that number? And go from there.
I like it. So you mentioned COVID in the last little segment, and we also wanted to talk about disaster preparedness policy. You being in South Florida and me being in Oklahoma City, there's big wind, twisty things that head our way all the time. But the people that aren't in the locations, they might be affected by something like COVID that vastly changes what it is that they're doing. It might make their project irrelevant, or they might need to pivot for a short time to make sure they can help the community at large when their mission all of a sudden isn't as important as what is happening. What does a disaster preparedness policy look like?
Oh, it covers a whole bunch of stuff. And I don't mean to make light of this at all, because as you say, Oklahoma and Florida, we have our fair share of different types of twisty, windy things. Ours has a tendency to bring, massive destruction for years, as I'm sure yours do, with lots of rain and wind. Anyway, but you want to have something in place so that when these things do hit, you're able to, as quickly and as safely as possible, resume operations. Some people call it, the short term is COOP, continuation of operations plan. What is it we need to do to ensure that we're able to continue to deliver the services in the most effective and safe way as possible should a situation arise? It could be COVID. It could be civil disturbance. It could be a hurricane. It could be a tornado. It could be a blizzard. It could be any number of things that happen where you're prepared for everything. You need to be able to prepare for things in advance, but also what happens when, especially in the Oklahoma situation, when out of nowhere you literally have minutes to prepare for something. Like here in Miami, what we do, okay, hurricane may be hitting in 2 to 3 days. Okay, what do we need to do at the office? Back in the day when, we had servers in the office, shut down the server, move all computers away from offices with windows. We had an interior place where all computers had to be stored. We told people, take home all your personal possessions. Everybody had a little plastic box that we called your to-go box, and you were to put things in there that you could use to work with post-storm until the office was up and running again. Emergency phone tree, who's going to call who, and if you're and if I can't reach you, then who's your emergency contact that's not living in your household that I can call and say, hey, I'm trying to reach Travis. I haven't been able to locate him. And I'm talking to maybe your brother or your mother or somebody else. And they're like, oh yeah, don't worry. He's safe. He's, up in Minnesota staying with family until he can get back. Okay, great. When you talk to him, please ask him to call in and check, and I'm saying this in pre-cell phone days.
Right.
Just have them, contact us. And then, making sure that your board members are okay. Contact all your vendors. Contact your funders. How are your programs going to be operating? We woke up on August 24th, 1992, and basically South Florida was decimated. Well, nonprofits work in that area are like, well, we don't have any clients. We don't have an office. We don't have, computers. We have nothing. So how, what's our plan to continue forward under those circumstances?
That you have other things that come into play here, like we're in Oklahoma City, which isn't too terribly close, but it's not terribly far from the Gulf of Mexico. So if a hurricane comes through and we want to collect food, clothing, water to then distribute down there, do we have to have a policy in place? Because it might not align with our mission, but it might be something that we feel drawn to do. Or in the case of Oklahoma City proper, you get hit with a tornado and your quote unquote entity still exists on paper. Are you able to collect other things to then distribute and hand out to first responders or people in need, or collect money to then funnel to something like the Red Cross or another organization that does fantastic things, like Samaritan's Purse, to help them meet their mission or help people that are in need at times of disaster?
And one thing I would also recommend when an organization is collecting, especially if they're collecting things for like you say, Oklahoma for Florida, whatever, or the Gulf Coast or whatever the case may be, make sure you're collecting the right things and that you have a proper supply chain, that it's going to the right entity for distribution. One of the things we would see here so often after a hurricane hit is people would send us clothes. I'm just using this as an example. And there would be, these organizations would get boxes of clothes and they had no way of knowing what's in these boxes, how to distribute them, because somebody just felt like, people lost their homes, which means they lost their clothing. I'm going to send clothing. Make sure that you have the right resources. I sit on the board of Catholic Charities here in Miami, and back when that horrific earthquake hit Haiti, we had boots on the ground with the priests that were still in Haiti to ask them what is needed most there. And how will you, if we get those to you, be able to distribute them? And so a whole plan was put into place. And I do have to say proudly that we were actually getting supplies there while others were still trying to figure out the logistics. And the same thing happened after Katrina. Again, having been through hurricanes quite often, the Catholic Charities of the state of Florida knew what to expect. Mm-hmm. So they got, the canned foods, the ways to prepare the foods, what have you. And they positioned themselves as close as they could to the path of Katrina without being affected. And within hours of the storm passing through, they just started moving west and setting up and, distributing the canned foods, distributing the water, that sort of stuff. And in some cases, they were using the foundation of the churches that were no longer there. And as a result, they were some of the first responders after Katrina. Mm-hmm. But again, there was a plan in place. They knew what to take. They had everything ready to go.
See, I think that is just an uplifting story. And I love that you shared it with us. So if you're a nonprofit, and so many times we get, stuck on this rice bowl mentality, like this is our rice bowl, this is our stuff, this is what we're doing. We want to share our rice bowl, which I don't think is a good policy to have. But use this story as an opportunity to create a partnership that might align with your mission. So if you were feeding homeless people in Oklahoma City, maybe you have a policy written to partner with another organization that would feed the then homeless hurricane survivors. And that's something that you can plan out in advance of what that might look like and to see what their need might be. It might be sending food directly. It aligns with your mission. It is perfectly normal. It makes sense. But understanding how to get the food from here to there, or the water or the supplies or whatever their need is, to understand those partnerships and what that might look like in that time. And you have it pre-planned out, like Debbie was saying. What a fantastic way to make sure that you're still able to provide some kind of service that's just beyond ourselves. I know everyone in the nonprofit world is doing things beyond themselves to give and support it in some way, shape, or form. But what a fantastic way to create new partnerships and ways to do things and get your message out there.
And if the organization that you're reaching out, and like you say, it's good to have, a counterpart organization, so you're not operating in the blind. Okay, you're feeding the homeless in Oklahoma City. These are the homeless places in Miami or wherever else. And you contact them and you say, what is it you need most? And if they say cash, then figure out, how am I going to get you money? Because a lot of times it costs more to ship the products down to them than if they were to go and buy the products themselves. And so that's the other thing to consider. Okay, if I take these, this pallet of water and try to ship it to Miami, what's it going to cost me? Whereas if I write that check for what it would cost me, they may be able to go out and buy 2 pallets of water and be able to help, twice as many people than your 1 pallet would help. Absolutely.
I got the pleasure and the honor of partnering with USAID, Harvard, MIT, and Tufts a few springs ago when I was going through a operational planners course. And the really cool thing about this is we were there representing the Navy in this scenario, and we have all the things, and we know all the things that the Navy can provide, the Navy Marine Corps team. Like, we can desalinize water. So if you have salt water available, we can turn it into fresh drinking water. We can do thousands of gallons a day on the ship, and that can be used to help deliver services. Well, when you go into this is a little bit outside the scope here, but you might be an NGO, non-governmental organization that, like Samaritan's Purse, like the Red Cross, that wants to provide services. And we set up a fantastic simulation, probably the best in-person simulation I've ever done, where us as the military, we can't directly provide aid. We can't be seen as a military coming into a country that sends the wrong messaging. That could, are they taking over? Are they here to fight on behalf of the rebels or the government, or all those things that are terrible? But when you have an organization like USAID running point, then they can then coordinate between Samaritan's Purse and the Catholic Charities and all these organizations that are there to help to ensure that everything is actually needed is being done in a way that makes sense. So you don't have one organization building 100 tents and another one building 500 tents when none of them need tents at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Man, that's fantastic. I'm glad we talked about this.
Like we said, you have to be prepared for an emergency to happen very suddenly. It might take 2 or 3 days for the emergency to come, or it may be, like with COVID, we all started seeing, February or whatever. And so when, at least here in Miami, when announcements started saying we're shutting down, so many organizations already had in place about how they were going to operate remotely. Mm-hmm. Working from home or, going into the office and checking the mail. And they had all of this in place. And I think this, for many organizations, at least here in Miami, what they're learning, and I have this client that is actually going through this now, they were planning to move offices this fall. And they actually made the decision to cut the size of office that they needed by 1/2, thus saving rent money, because they found how efficiently that they were able to work remotely. Mm-hmm. They do miss that need to have a place when it can finally happen where people can come together around a big table and have some of that face-to-face interaction versus a Zoom meeting, because, we're all getting zoomed out. But, it really helped them rethink how they did business. Mm. So as bad as disasters can be, sometimes they help the organization think smarter.
Absolutely. If we look back to Katrina, we had FEMA in place, we had all these organizations, but what we didn't have was how they were going to work together. So for FEMA to get actual services to the people and other organizations that needed at the time, they didn't do a great job. And I think the director of FEMA was fired at the time. And there's a lot that we learned about it.
And that happens with any disaster, in my opinion. We've learned so much from COVID. God forbid we ever have to go experience this, in our lifetimes, much less, next 100 years or 200 years. We've learned from it. We've learned how, like I said, we've learned how to operate smarter. We've learned how to operate safely. We've learned how to, I'm talking to judges and lawyers and everything like that who's, they haven't been in a courtroom for 8 months, but business is getting done. Mm-hmm. And so it's, these things are going to change so much about how we do a lot of our day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, you're seeing it all over the place. Imagine trying to be an event planner, and you would love to move to someplace like New York City, which is essentially ground zero for COVID in the U.S., and you can't go now because of the environment that we're in. You can't do it because we're not doing in-person events and all those other things. Well, now you can sit at your home in South Florida or Oklahoma City, and you can coordinate with people there and plan online virtual events without ever having to go.
And in communities where you're able to do small groups, there's one nonprofit down here that has a huge gala every year. They postponed it. But now that we can have small groups getting together, what they've done is, depending on what level of partnership you come in as, you will, as a sponsor, host 10 people maximum, which is maximum we can do, in your home with a completely catered dinner being brought in. And so, you're still interacting, but it's up to you to, determine how you want that, is it in your backyard? How do you want that to be in your home? But if you come in as a sponsor, depending, you get everything from the full catered dinner to the staff to, hey, we're going to have a couple of bottles of wine, to, hey, here's my donation. So you have everything across the spectrum. And then the awards part and the business of the event is still being done online. And everybody, you just put a laptop somewhere where everybody can see it and get it done.
Absolutely. We have covered just an astronomical amount in the time that we have, and I knew this would go long. I wanted it to go long, but there's still one more policy that I wanted to talk about that a lot of, especially new nonprofits, don't think about. and that's the whistleblower policy. God forbid something is happening within your organization that this situation arises, right? That's not the hope. But if it does happen, how are we going to protect that person? Because that need to come forward and the problem needs to be handled. What kind of policy? How would you write a policy for that? And where would you find information on writing one?
One of the best places for a little background as to how this came about, shall we say. A while back, there was a lot of press about corporate fraud and things not being done correctly at the corporate level. So there was legislation that became known as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which basically protected individuals who were disclosing that information. It's been made more broad to include, for nonprofits especially, if you see anything that is not quite right, to be able to have a mechanism by which you can report it. It can be investigated, it can be addressed, but you are still protected in your position. You cannot be fired, you cannot be demoted, you cannot have your pay cut, you can't be transferred to, a different job, whatever the case may be. That you as an individual are protected, even in light of all of the stuff that was shared, even if it didn't come to anything, because you may have, I won't say jumped the gun, but you may have thought something was there, but it wasn't really there. And I actually experienced that at one time with an organization I was involved with. I get a call one day from the board chair, and he said, listen, and I was a volunteer at the time. I stepped off of their board, I think, when this happened. He said, it's been brought to our attention that someone in the organization has questioned some of the expenses made by one of the executive leadership, and we're now doing an investigation. I want you to be part of the committee. So our job was to go back and look at all the expenses this person had made, their reimbursements, the receipts, the documentation. And basically what happened was this person was a member of a club that also had like a hotel attached to it. And so it was cheaper for when out-of-town people came for them to stay at this club than it was for them to stay at a hotel. So she would make arrangements for them to stay at the club and have, their privileges, their eating privileges and everything like that. Just like if they traveled in from out of town and stayed at a hotel and submitted their expenses, it was just cheaper. And she would be, the executive director was being reimbursed for these expenses because it was her membership. And so, making sure all the documentation was there, because, we would have written a check to that person that was in from out of town, and once they provided the receipts. So it was just a question of, did she provide all the documentation she needed to be able to be reimbursed appropriately? At the end of the day, yes. But it was a process we had to go through. But the person who said, hey, I'm not too sure about this, nothing happened to them.
See, so I can picture a couple different groups of people listening to this right now. One's like, well, we're going to do whatever we want. Why is that person going to be whatever? And there's the other side of the coin, which I'm on. I love accountability. And if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing the way you said you're going to do it, this whistleblower policy is like you described, just making sure everyone's got their ducks in a row. You verified it. It's no big deal. And you're moving on. If you're running an organization and your accountability is questionable, then this kind of policy should worry you. But the bigger worry is, how long is your organization going to last if you're not operating with honesty, integrity, transparency, and accountability? That's the bigger downfall there.
And when you go when you go, especially with newer nonprofits, they're now finally ready for their first audit. And one of the first things that's going to be asked is, do you have a whistleblower policy? Can we see it? At least here, here it is. Because again, it ties back into that whole, financial accountability under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SARBOX as it was eventually called. the CPAs are having to make sure that there's a process in place that if there's a lack of integrity on the financial side, there's a process so people can report it. And it's just been expanded to be all aspects of a nonprofit organization.
I love it. I love all of this. I love everything that we've talked about. And I even love you, Debbie.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And you know what? While we're here, what we were talking about earlier, you need to give a shout out to all the wonderful things that have happened to you in the past week. Your listeners need to hear that. And like I said, you got to get it out there.
I got to get out there. You're holding me accountable. I just said how much I love accountability, so I'm going to do it. We're recording this on November 2nd, 2020. I got a word over the last week that the Nonprofit Architect podcast hit number 6 in the U.S., number 8 in Canada, and we were featured in Podcast Magazine in the top 25 veteran-led podcasts. We came in at number 11. And all of this isn't because I'm great or because we have great guests. It's because whatever we're talking about, you guys are loving and you're sharing and you're commenting and you're liking and you're rating and you're getting some real value out of this thing. And I thank you, Debbie, for being a fantastic guest, and mostly to you, the listeners and fans that are getting what you need to be successful and help you build a stronger nonprofit.
It's my pleasure. It's been, I can't believe it's been almost an hour and a half. It just seems like minutes ago we started.
Absolutely. This has been fantastic, Debbie. Please, before I ask you where they can find you, I want everyone to know that Debbie gave me this gigantic list, this huge list of documents and checklists and things that you should have in your organization. And if you haven't already seen it, this is going to be attached as a PDF so you can make sure that you have the things that you need covered in your organization. And it's an exhaustive list. We didn't talk about but 6 of these things and kind of mentioned a few others. But go through this. If you have questions and you're not yet in the Nonprofit Architect podcast community, you should be. Free group. Go in there, ask your questions, and we'll get them answered. I hope to one day in the future have all of these available for download, and you can have an example to follow. And if you get something from any website that you download and you're like, I'm going to employ this, make sure to contact your legal team to make sure all of this stuff is valid and it hasn't been updated. This might be perfectly valid when I give it to you tomorrow, but it might have changed over time. The requirements might have changed over the last couple of years. I don't know. So please have your legal team verify that. Debbie, this hour and a half flew by. Where can people get a hold of you if they want to know more about what you do or want your services?
Well, my website, it's not www. It's just what I call sflapc.com. Or they can reach out to me at ddkorge@icloud.com. All the information is on my website, and I will be more than happy to follow up with anybody. Again, as I call it, sflapc.com.
And we'll have those in the show notes for you to click on the link. And if you didn't catch what Debbie said there, thanks again, Debbie. This was a great episode.
My pleasure. Anytime. Look forward to staying in touch and being informed.
You've been listening to The Nonprofit Architect. To listen to all our past shows, visit http://nonprofitarchitect.org. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our show. Thank you.